Welcome to those of you who have just joined us, and welcome back to those of you who were at the AGM. If you don't know, Galha has been promoting humanism from an LGBT point of view for 35 years now. We were founded in 1979. There's literature at the back. Please do take some, have a look, and feel free to come and talk to me or any of the freshly elected committee. I think we've almost got a full house. We've got Adam, our secretary, standing up there. We've got Chris and Josh is somewhere, and Mike Kitto, our finance officer, over there. So feel free afterwards to come and talk to us. Please turn off your phones or anything else that vibrates or rings or dings, or turn it to silent. Please think about making a donation at the bar. How are we doing for donations over there?
It's a bit light.
It's a bit low. So please think about it, because we do need to cover the costs of the hiring the room and all the equipment. I want to very quickly tell you about our next couple of events. Next month we have the Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association, Andrew Copson, talking about objections to humanism, and presumably why they're not valid. And that's Friday, May the 22nd, here at Conway Hall. And then in June, we've got Matthew Hodson, the Chief Executive of GMFA, the Gay Men's Health Charity, talking about the challenge of HIV prevention. And that is Friday, June the 12th, not June the 19th, as advertised in the newsletter. We moved that so that we don't clash with the PHA conference in Bristol. I think that's it. That's all the business. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Chris Ward, who is your host for tonight.
I'm going to try and use this because we paid for it. But if it doesn't work, I'll stop. Welcome all of you to the first ever Galha LGBT Humanists hustings. This is the first, but it won't be the last. We have GLA elections next year, the mayoral elections, and we want to make sure that you have an opportunity whenever these elections happen to hold your representatives, people who may be standing in your constituency, to account. I'd like to warmly welcome our representatives from the four parties that responded. I'll introduce them later, but first of all, just a few housekeeping guidelines. I don't like rules, guidelines. First of all, tonight is supposed to be enjoyable, so if at any point you find yourself with an empty, it's not a glass, it's a receptacle, do go to the bar and get yourself a drink. I'm going to try and keep the format as informal as possible so that we do get a proper debate, and not this stale email trail sort of question and answer session. Just a few guidelines. This is a candidate question time, so we do expect questions from the audience, not speeches. You're more than welcome to provide a few lines of context, but I will cut you off if you're taking too long, because we want to get through as many people as possible. Our candidates here tonight, having been a candidate in the past, I can tell you that hustings, whilst being a very important element of our democracy, they don't tend to get candidates very many votes. They would be better off themselves out of their constituencies door knocking tonight. So I want to say my appreciation to them to turning up, and I'm a big fan of passionate debate. But when you are heckling, please heckle sparingly and please heckle respectfully, because they are here for our benefit more than their own. If you can ask direct questions at all candidates, please, so don't just pick on one party, because every candidate must have an opportunity to answer questions put. The format: candidates will all get 5 minutes at the beginning to set out their stall. We have determined the order, then we'll go to you for questions and answers. At the end, roughly at 8:45, we'll ask the candidates to spend a maximum of 3 minutes to sum up why you should vote for them, and for them to make any other points that may not have arisen. At 9 o'clock, we'll have a couple of drinks afterwards, before departing to the pub, and I'd like to welcome you all to the pub afterwards, including the candidates, so you can have a chance to talk to them further. If you are so inclined, you can live tweet the event using the hashtag GalhaHustings, which I think is up there somewhere. So we invited 5 representatives from the parties that are doing particularly well in the polls at the moment. 4 responded from the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. We did not receive a response from UKIP, I'm afraid. I'm going to introduce the candidates in turn now, and they'll get their few minutes to speak. The first up is Emily Brothers from the Labour Party. Emily is Labour's candidate in Sutton and Cheam. She has fought for the civil rights of disabled people for most of her life and is a former president of the National Federation of the Blind. Among her achievements in campaigning, perhaps one of her most impressive is extracting an apology from Sun columnist Rod Liddell, or as she called him at the time, a ridiculous man writing in a rag of a paper. I have to be impartial about political parties, not newspapers. Originally from Merseyside, Emily has been blind since childhood and is the country's first openly trans parliamentary candidate. So I'd like you all to welcome for the Labour Party, please, Emily Brothers.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd spend much of my 5 minutes just telling you something about myself and why Labour is at the core of who I am and what I'm seeking to achieve. The basic facts are I live in southwest London in Sutton and Cheam, which is a constituency I'm seeking to take from the Liberal Democrat incumbent. I've lived there for 25 years. I have 2 children, one at university, 20 and 18. And I have a background working both in terms of campaigning and also professionally in disability rights and service delivery, as well as broader equality. I worked as head of policy, responsible for local government, health and social care, and political participation, and various other areas with the Equality and Human Rights Commission up until 12 months ago, when I decided it was time that I wanted to find my own voice within a political context. My story goes back to Liverpool, as Chris said, where I come from a working class family, and I had a childhood where I gradually lost my sight. And the experience of eye operation after eye operation as a child in Liverpool's Old Age Hospital told me a lot about the value of the NHS. It retained my sight for longer than would have been possible, even though eventually that fight was lost. But we went on to fight other battles about disability rights, access to information, and all kinds of things. But in 1974, when there was a lot of strike action, 3-day weeks, etc., and my father, who worked in a car factory, couldn't afford to bring me to London, to Moorfields Eye Hospital for some specialist treatment, it was the workers on the picket line who put together a collection in order to pay for the travel to come down to London for the consultation. That told me then a lot about working solidarity. And that has stayed with me to this day. And the other thing is that when we went back, there was some money left over, and they said as there was nothing else that could be done for my failing eyesight, I should use it to buy some specialist equipment. I brought a Braille machine, which still 40 years later sits on my desk, and I use to knock out attack lines against my opponents. And that work in solidarity lived on so much more also from 6 months ago when I came out to Pink News and also talked to a lot of media about my experience as a gay woman, as a woman with a transsexual history. And it was amazing the positive response from ordinary working people across the country, but particularly from the Labour movement. It was only Rod Liddell, as we've heard, who had some silly things to say. He said, the thing is, seeing she's blind, how does she know she was the wrong sex? I wrote in The Independent the following day, when Rod Liddell goes to bed at night and turns the lights out, how does he know he's a man? So when you go home tonight, How will you know your gender when you turn the lights out? Perhaps don't answer that question. Rod Liddell hasn't answered it because I think he's frightened of the dark. And these are just stories about me as an ordinary person fighting for equality, fighting for my rights, my understanding of who I am, which was constrained by the fact I had a Catholic education and I wasn't able to explore other experiences and other issues, and that meant I went on for so long unhappy. And that's what I'm seeking to do as a politician, is to change things for ordinary people, working families across this country, so that people can be happy, so they can deal with the cost of living crisis that they're facing, so that we can have a health service that is free at delivery for everybody, that we have an economic recovery that is fair and in which everybody can take part in that recovery, not for the privileged few. My politics is Labour to the core. It has a vision. It is about sharing recovery. It is sharing the prosperity of this country. That's what I want for Sutton and Cheam. That's what I want for Britain going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Next up, we have James Bellis from the Conservative Party. James is a Conservative candidate in Vauxhall. He grew up in Stourbridge in the West Midlands, where he attended his local comprehensive and sixth form. After reading economics and watching Everton at the University of Liverpool, he moved to Clapham 15 years ago to start his career as an economist. He is now a director at a specialist economics consultancy, specialising in the telecommunications sector, where he advises governments, regulators and companies on policy and regulatory matters. Outside of work and politics, James is a keen runner, having completed a number of the big city marathons. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome James Bellis from the Conservative Party.
Thank you. I'll try and do this actually without the microphone, if that's okay with people. Chris has given me a fantastic introduction. Can I just thank Chris for organising this and everyone who's organised this event, and you all for coming along. It's great to be invited and to take part alongside such a great panel, so thank you all very much for being here. This is actually the fourth hustings that I've done this week, along with my Vauxhall colleague, if that's the right word, Adrian. I'm not sure if any of you were at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern last night, where we did a LGBT question time there. If you were, then apologies, you're probably going to hear the same thing 2 nights in a row. But good on you for coming to both events. As Chris has said, I'm the Conservative candidate in Vauxhall. It's the area of London where I live. It's the area of London where I've lived for most of the last 15 years. It's obviously also one of the sort of heartlands of London's LGBT community. It's obviously one of the reasons why I chose to live there. I find it such a great place to live. The sort of interaction of the LGBT community and so many other communities, in harmony in Vauxhall, I think, is a great thing. We see a lot of concern in Vauxhall at the moment around the kind of future of the LGBT community and a number of the venues in that community. And actually it was very pleasing last night at that event at the RVT that politicians from all parties pledged their support to try and do all they can to make sure that we continue to have a thriving LGBT community venues across London, not just in Vauxhall. So obviously it means an awful lot to me to be the Conservative candidate in the area where I live, where I've made my home in London. But a number of other reasons why I'm very proud to be a Conservative candidate in this election. Now, it's given me no surprise if I admit the fact that historically the Conservative Party has not had a particularly great reputation on LGBT rights, and that's kind of well deserved when you look at some of the things that people have said in the past. But over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, I think the Conservative Party has really changed. We have more out Conservative MPs in the last Parliament than I think any other parties put together. We have a large number of out LGBT candidates fighting in elections this May. And I'm incredibly proud that the Conservative-led government with support from our colleagues, obviously has put LGBT equality really at the heart of its social policy over the course of the last 5 years. I think we've achieved an awful lot, and I think as a country and as a party we can be incredibly proud of that. There are obviously still further challenges that remain for the LGBT community, and if I was elected as an MP representing Vauxhall, but also representing the LGBT community more widely, and those are challenges I'd be very keen to take up and support. I think challenges both at home around sort of limiting the growth in HIV infections, which is a big issue in Lambeth and in Vauxhall, limiting homophobic, transphobic bullying in schools. I think it's another challenge that we have. Great to see progress from the government on that. We should be doing more on that. And then also continuing to fight for LGBT rights around the world. I think it's important that Britain uses its diplomatic power and its economic powers to really push the message out to other countries that we need to see true LGBT equality across the world. I think the final reason why I'm very proud to be a Conservative candidate in this election is just looking back at what great progress I think this country has made over the last 5 years. Thanks to the hard work of everybody in this country and to the policies put in place by our government, we've really turned the corner in the last 5 years. When we got into government, there was the famous note left by the Labour Treasury Minister saying there's no money left. Now they try and claim that was a joke. It wasn't very funny, it was the absolute truth. What we've done over the last 5 years is we've managed to bring the deficit under control. We've halved the deficit as a share of national income. And at the same time, we've managed to create over 2 million new private sector jobs. We've got 750,000 new businesses have started up in this country, so creating a great opportunity for people, really reinvigorating local communities and local economies. Right in Vauxhall, we've seen unemployment fall by 40%. We've seen 2,500 youngsters take up an apprenticeship so that they can get the skills that they need to go on and build a successful career. We've seen more children in good or outstanding schools than we have done previously, and we've done all of that whilst taking 3 million of the lowest paid workers out of income tax, giving 26 million workers an income tax cut. Now, I appreciate there is still more to be done, but the one thing that has really shocked me actually about hustings that we've done in Vauxhall this week, and generally about this election campaign, is that no other party has really anything to say about how we actually continue to secure economic growth, how we continue to secure prosperity for our country. We need that prosperity to deliver the good quality public services that we need, to deliver the NHS, to deliver the schools that we all need and deserve. And it's very clear, I think, so far, that it's only the Conservative Party that has the plan to do that and that can deliver on that and deliver security for every family, every household, up and down this country, in every constituency. And that's why I'm delighted to be a Conservative candidate in this election, to try and take that message out, that we need that security, and only I think a Conservative government can deliver that security for everyone.
That's wonderful, thank you. Next up we have Adrian Hyyrylainen-Trett. As a well-known and respected equality campaigner, Adrian led the Liberal Democrat campaign for equal marriage. As chair of LGBT+ Lib Dem's, LGBT+, I love that name, and the author of the equal marriage motion at the 2010 Lib Dem conference, Adrian was in the news more recently for becoming the first ever parliamentary candidate to disclose he was HIV positive, stating that he became so as a consequence of all these things: bullying, mental health, low self-esteem. All those things could have been prevented, yet all these things are still happening and no one is talking about it. I feel I owe it to the community to talk about it. So please give a warm welcome from the Liberal Democrats, Adrian Hyyrylainen-Trett.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Chris and to Galha for organising the debate this evening. I thought I might start on a personal note as well. As some of you may or may not know, I'm a local resident in Vauxhall, so Vauxhall is also my home constituency, as I've since moved there with marrying my partner. who happens to be Finnish, which is why I have the new double-barreled surname, only just 3 weeks ago. So it's been quite a challenging last couple of 2 or 3 weeks. And because of that marriage that I'm now able to have, that has been one of the key driving forces as an LGBT campaigner over the last 5 or 6 years, has been to be able to have equal love for everyone, whether you're gay or whether you're straight. So I mean, it's good to see the things actually happen in the world of politics, where you actually start a policy and you actually finish one in the process too. But as a Liberal Democrat candidate, we've had 5 quite difficult years in coalition with my friend over there. So we're usually quite friendly on these debates, so we're quite used to it now. But it has to be said, there have been difficult issues that we've had to deal with. We, as Liberal Democrats, believe in the stronger economy and the fairer society. Now that means doing in between what the 2 other main parties don't do. One, Labour would cut too much, and on the other hand, Tories Labour would spend too much and the Tories would cut too much. So we actually have a balance in between, in the middle, sensible solution, which is why we call it a stronger economy with a fairer society for opportunities for everyone. And those 5, that sort of main plank of words, added to the 5 key policies that we have on the front of our manifesto, are what we prioritise, what we believe that we will do. Because as you know from 2010, we had a manifesto, and actually 75% of that manifesto was actually delivered in government. Some people don't believe that, but actually that is the truth. And therefore, those 5 key priorities we had then, and I know there were some other priorities that we didn't fulfil, that didn't happen sadly, but they weren't on the front page of the manifesto. So the 5 ones that we will have will be, again, reducing income tax. So again, to people from 10,600 to 12,500 to raise that level of income tax so people don't pay any on that as a starting point. To ensure that £8 billion is put into the National Health Service, and that is actually fully costed and funded, as per the IFS, which came out yesterday, actually said the Liberal Democrats actually had a small tick. We actually were the most transparent and honest of the four main parties they chose to look at the budgets and how we had put forward that case for how we could spend that money. So the £8 billion into the National Health Service, along with especially mental health as a key component to that, which is something that no other party has put on their front page of the manifesto. We'd also continue looking for increasing jobs, which we actually have the most number of people employed in work at this point in time that's ever been before, and also more apprenticeships. 2.2 million have been done in the last government, and we obviously want to increase and do that even further in the next government. Furthermore, there is obviously the environment. Environment is a key issue, and we have 5 green laws as part of our manifesto on the front cover to describe what key things we should do with the environment, tackling climate change and ensuring more renewable energies are some of the examples. But I will come back to my key campaigning issues, and that's on equality and diversity. That's what I fundamentally believe in. As a Liberal Democrat, we believe in an open, free, fair society where no one is enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. And actually that paragraph in our preamble is actually key to who we are as people. And when I came out 3 or 4 weeks ago about being HIV positive, the only party I believed I could do that with was the Liberal Democrats. And I know that I had support from the Deputy Prime Minister downwards to be able to support, to come out about the issue, because obviously it was something that I knew would cause some controversy. And as Emily stated, had her moment with one of the papers. I also had mine, and that's just part of the course of nature. But actually 98% of the responses I've had on the issue have been positive, in terms of people actually thanking me for saying something about the issue that actually lots of people care about. And that's what I'll finish on, and actually that LGBT rights in this country are in a good position in comparison to elsewhere in the world. We know there are still 78 countries which criminalise people for being just gay, full stop, and that is unacceptable and shouldn't be the case. But there's still lots of things in our country that we can do a lot better. And LGBT rights have legal composition, like we have the Same-Sex Marriage Act, but actually it's changing the culture and the community and making sure everyone feels safe and secure. So that means, you know, ensuring that there's no homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying in schools, means making sure there's no hate crime, you know, even in Vauxhall, somewhere where you think might be a safe place to hold hands and walk down the street, it isn't. So, you know, we still have a lot of work to do on that. And also, following that, actually ensuring that in the sporting arena, you know, homophobic, biphobic chanting, transphobic chanting is not acceptable in a sports ground, and something that's particularly close to me as being a very big sports fan and a football fan, which I enjoy, but sadly there are those you know, instances which make it very hard to deal with in those areas. Yeah. So I think you'll take it back, you know, LGBT equality is key to Liberal Democrats, and I hope you will look forward to taking your questions here this evening. Many thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. The last representative is Benali Hamdache. Benali lives in Tufnell Park and works for a trade magazine as a freelance journalist. He's also worked on campaigns fighting mental health stigma and helped set up a charity for young people with mental health problems. In the Green Party, he is the chair of the LGBTIQ Greens. He is their party's Equalities spokesperson, and he's part of their National Policy Committee, and has helped put together Green Party policy on banning Wonga's extortionate cost of credit and fighting for refugees to have a guaranteed right to higher education. He also stood in the local elections in Islington for the Green Party last May. So, ladies and gentlemen, Benali Hamdache.
So I just want to start. Oh, is that not on? Should we swap? There we go. Technical issue. So I just want to start again by thanking you for having me here, and I just also want to comfort everyone. I know I'm dressed head to toe in blue, but I am actually the candidate of the Green Party. So, you know, it's a real pleasure to talk here, and I'm going to start again with a personal note. You know, my lived experience and my experience of life very much drove me to get into politics. I grew up as the son of an Algerian man and the mother of daughter, son. Those are some difficult names there. The son of an English woman, and certainly my dad's lived experience motivated me to get into politics. He came here to do his PhD, he came here to contribute, but, you know, he didn't finish his PhD because of the racism that he experienced at the University of Nottingham in the 70s. And again, you know, my dad lived through the Gulf War here, was chased down the street, called a fucking Iraqi. You know, even today, I still feel that racism is prevalent in our society. To the border agent at the Eurotunnel that told him they'd ruined his life because he asked why they were checking his passport so long. To the police officer who, when he reported a crime, the first question he asked is, "But where are you from?" As if that was the most important question. And for me as well, and I grew up in Nottingham. I went to a school that wasn't doing particularly well. In fact, the GCSE pass rate was a very humble 19%. I was one of the very few people from my school to go on to do A-levels and to go on and do to university even. And just like my dad, I went on to do a PhD, though I'm on a break at the minute, and it's been about 3 years, so we'll see about that. But again, my experience of working through university, being a young gay man from an ethnic background, motivated me to get into politics. You know, I've been attacked for my sexuality, I've been attacked for my ethnicity, both on the street, and it's very much an issue that I feel that passionate about, and we still have to address. But equally, you know, I've also, in my bio, I've worked for Migrants' Rights Charity, and I feel in this current climate, with the scourge of UKIP and the rise of anti-immigrant rhetoric, that we do live in a society that's becoming sadly less tolerant. And really that's what motivated me to get into politics. So in terms of what the Greens are standing for, I did want to touch on LGBT rights and humanism as well, because I think humanism is an important thing to talk about, and I think the Greens are offering a very progressive agenda that does embrace secularism in state. I think there are a few kind of third rails in politics that a lot of political parties aren't talking about, that the Green agenda is talking about addressing. Things like removing funding from faith schools, because I don't think faith schools should be funded by the state. Removing the bizarre state where we have bishops in the House of Lords, undemocratically elected, and the fact that we have the Church of England as an official state religion. I think it feels very outdated, and we are, again, talking about reforming that, and I think that's hugely important. I also am really proud to be in the party of Caroline Lucas, who has advanced a bill in Parliament to make PSHE, which is inclusive of LGBT people, mandatory in schools. And I think it's a sore shame that the other political parties in Parliament didn't get behind that bill, because we've run out of time now to get it into that Parliament. And it is hugely important. And I don't think actually this is an issue that can wait. There are scores of children up and down the country who aren't getting the education they need. I know that I grew up as a young, gay Muslim boy who had a real difficulty coming out. But in my school, I never had any education about what it was to be gay, and then never any indication of any signs of support or aid that could be got when I was really struggling with coming to terms with my sexuality. And every month that passes by when we don't have inclusive PSHE and LGBT is an outrage. And I'm really disappointed that we didn't get that bill through, and I'm really proud of Caroline Lucas for pushing that in Parliament. On top of that, I think Caroline has been a tireless advocate for LGBT rights in Parliament. She's one of the few people to raise the fact that marriage equality wasn't truly equal when we don't have equal rights to pensions in civil partnerships and LGBT people. And unfortunately, in that review, other political parties said it would be up to a review, rather than simply saying that's an unconditional right. You are deserving of your pension rights, irrespective of whether or not you're straight, gay, or bisexual. So I really think that as a party of Caroline, as a party of Natalie, I'm really proud that we are pushing for equal rights in Parliament. And I do think it is, we are dealing with a different kind of politics. I think there's many hustings that, previously the Greens wouldn't have been on because we weren't taken seriously. But politics has blown open. We do live in a multi-party democracy now. Well, more than 3 than it was. And particularly, we think about in London, 1 in 7 constituencies are going to be swing seats. So actually the rhetoric that it's between Labour and the Tories is actually not particularly important. For most of us, we've got a free vote. And actually, in fact, in scores of constituencies across London, the Green vote is growing hugely. If you look at the local elections, the Green Party in many areas came second to Labour or the Tories. And there's a real option now for us Londoners to actually pick and choose a different type of politics to what we've been offered for the last 100 years of being swapping between red and blue and yellow. What we really can do is we can push for progressive Green vote in London. And what a wonderful option, because for the last 5 years we've seen the drag of the right by UKIP, the drag towards intolerance, the drag towards what feels like the politics of the 50s rather than the 21st century. I really think a strong Green vote in 2015, in May, will send a powerful message that we won't stand for migrant bashing, we won't stand for the stale, greying politics of Westminster that we've had for too long. We are looking for a progressive alternative, we're looking for a brave and radical alternative. And I'm really proud to be the representative of a party that is offering such a different option, because I do think, you've looked at the press coverage last year, the Green Party apparently is raving or frothing, but I do really think the fact that our politics have become seen as radical is a sense of how far politics has drifted to the right. So I'm proud that we're offering a politics that people are desperately searching for.
Thank you very much. Questions? Right, we have one question who somebody already has asked, but I will take you in freeze. So I saw a gentleman over there in a blue shirt, and a gentleman from the Dorset Humanists at the front. Do you want to take Tyrone first?
Earlier this year, a report. No, it's time now. Okay. Testing.
Can everybody hear?
I'm sorry, you might have to give up on the mic.
Okay, it's okay. You can yell. It's fine. So earlier this year, a report from the Education Select Committee called for high-quality PSHE education, including at its core sex and relationship education, to be made part of the statutory school curriculum. And I think from Benali then it was proposed and didn't actually make it true. There's also very widespread public support for this. So what is your party's view on this, and would you support it in the parliamentary vote?
Yeah, there's a general question really on the nature of the hustings and just as to whether you think we should be addressed on the basis of our identity. Is it patronising to address a group of albeit LGBT people on the basis of their identity and issues and are presumed to be important to them on the basis of their identity? In 2010, this country was on the cusp of a huge economic crisis. Debt levels at sort of Greek level. We still have a huge national debt and a national deficit, which are going to continue to present issues for this country going forward. It's a big issue, amongst other issues. And I've only heard one of the candidates actually talk about that issue, about economic stewardship. I've heard anybody talk about sharing the prosperity, but it's all very well sharing the prosperity and giving out the sweeties, but you've actually got to be able to support an economy to actually produce the goods to enable you to do that. So I just wonder whether we're missing the big issues here.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's on foreign aid budget, that you'll give or will want to give different amounts of foreign aid budget to various countries. However, as you said, many countries, if we were to visit them, would kill us, put us in prison, whatever else. And they've all signed up to the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, a lot of them have. Should we not be asking them to commit to this, rather than just giving them money without committing to anything?
Okay, Benali.
So I'm going to start the foreign aid question, and I think foreign aid is a blunt tool, I think, to move regimes towards certain actions. I think foreign aid, ideally, would never be going direct to these regimes, it would always be going direct to the people. I think what the mechanisms that we've got to pressure these regimes into taking action over human rights is actually by trade, and actually by the fact that we are selling weapons every day to a despicable Saudi Arabian regime. Why are we continuing to do that? We also balanced and made our economy that is so reliant on Saudi oil that we are unable to actually put much pressure on them. Why aren't we moving towards renewables? Why aren't we lessening our reliance on Saudi oil? These are the facts that we're not the critical friend that we need to be, and we're not the aggressive pursuer of human rights that we need to be on a foreign stage. And I think foreign aid is not the right tool for pushing regimes into action, but it is about sanctions, it's about action on the UN, and it's about pushing regimes on that level, personally, because I think you can still reach the people who are in need with foreign aid without actually then abandoning your pursuit of human rights. On PSHE, I think I've talked about it a little bit already, but I think it is so hugely important. And I also think there are some other kind of elements to consider as well. I mean, with academies and with free schools, we've seen the fragmentation of our education system and more opt-outs on our curriculum. And I think we really have to address that actually academies and free schools shouldn't be able to opt out of these core needs. And the idea that any child would be at one of these schools without the ability to find out about their identity and be tooled up to survive. That's actually how important it is sometimes. So I definitely think we have to look at that. On identity and on the economy, I do think, sometimes it's hugely important, I think, for us to get together and talk about shared issues. And I don't think that's to neglect other issues like the economy, but I think there are certain common experiences that we can all talk about that are really important to talk about. The fear of being attacked on the street, the experiences that we had at school where education wasn't clear enough, discrimination in the workplace. I think there are things we all need to talk about. But I also think, absolutely, we need to talk about the bigger issues, and I think the economy is a hugely important issue, of course. But I think one of the biggest issues is that we have a consensus with the mainstream parties on the economy that isn't working for anyone. Brown promised us we had the end of boom and bust, but neoliberal economics aren't working well enough for anyone. GDP growth no longer delivers increases in welfare for the average person. It's decoupled from increases in wealth. What we have to look at is an economy that is only working for the 1%, and we have to look at what we can do to remodel that. And the biggest thing that I think also all my colleagues will struggle to answer is that we live in a planet of finite resources. Endless growth in the way that we exist now is not going to be sustainable. I mean, even classic economists talked about the fact that infinite growth would not be possible on this planet. We need to be looking at how do we make the economy more sustainable, how do we make the economy more fair, and I think only the Greens are offering an alternative to what's been offered classically.
Could I just ask before you start, could I ask the candidates to be slightly more brief in their answers so we can get out as many questions as possible?
Fine, thanks Chris. I will give you some nice brief answers. Tyrone, on your question on PHSE, yes, it's a no-brainer. I'm sorry, it should be included in all schools, I know that our current policy states state schools. I actually believe it should be all free schools and all faith schools, because there's no reason why any of the schools should be missed out, and because all children need to have mandatory sex and relationship education. It's just a no-brainer. So absolutely, I would support you on that. My friend down the front here from the Dorset Humanists, it's a tricky one, okay? I, as the Liberal Democrats, actually brought the bill into Parliament to secure, which was done by Michael Moore, former Scottish Secretary, who put the 0.7% in law, so we will always do that. I actually think that was a really great thing, because I think there are other parties who perhaps wouldn't have done that. At the same time, I agree with you that it's how that money is spent, and whether that money should be going to NGOs and actually LGBT activists on the ground to help them, rather than governments who then spend it on war weapons like Saudi Arabia and other countries do, then that's an issue. So I'm sort of half and half with you. I can see where you're coming from, but I still think the 0.7% is actually critically important. And as to my friend over there, I didn't get your name. Brian. I sort of see what you're coming from, but that's why I try to make my introduction a bit of a mixture. Identity with a bit of economy in the middle of it, and a bit of other things around it as well. Because economy is extremely important, and I still believe that, you know, even within this coalition government, there are things that have happened that I don't agree with, that actually we are on the right path to recovery, but I still think that we would do things differently to either my Conservative or Labour counterparts here, where I think we will, Conservatives will cut too much, and I think Labour will spend too much, and I think there is a balanced way to do that in between, which is where I think, I believe that, the economy is an important part, but identity of all of us on this panel and everybody else in the room is also critical as well to the discussion, I think.
James.
Okay, cool. I'll do that yeah, I'm used to shouting. On the, let me take the SRE question first. I mean, absolutely, we want to have a kind of situation where, all children have sort of good quality PHSE education, and SRE is a big part of that. I'm nervous generally about legislating for things. I think having kind of governments that kind of rush into passing new legislation, I think can sometimes be a mistake. I think we need to maintain flexibility around how this is taught. I think what's vital is that we provide resources to schools, we provide training to teachers so that they're comfortable teaching these subjects, and so on. I think it's also, I think it's important that we don't have, we have parental choice in education as well. And so, I do support free schools. There's the demand for free schools in an area. And it's absolutely right that we support parental choice in education. On the second, I can't remember the second or third, but the foreign aid point, and again, I think it's absolutely right that we spend 0.7% of GDP on foreign aid. We shouldn't try and balance our books on the backs of the world's poorest. Again, whether you really need to legislate to say that you're going to do that, it's not really clear to me. I think the governments have kind of clear commitments. I think that should be enough. Kind of putting in law what you're going to do in future on something like that strikes me as perhaps not entirely necessary. I think we need to be very careful about how we use that budget. It shouldn't necessarily go direct to governments. We should be clear about which countries get foreign aid. We should use that foreign aid efficiently. And we should absolutely use, as I said, our sort of diplomatic powers through the European Union, through the UN, through the Commonwealth in particular, to make it clear to countries that we expect to see people in those countries treated with respect and dignity and equal rights being rolled out across countries. Whether there's a kind of blunt stick of saying you get no aid until you do that, I'm not sure. I think we have to be quite careful that we're not seen as the old colonial power kind of dictating to countries what they must do. I think that can also backfire, as we've seen in a couple of examples. And then finally, on the matter of the economy, you're absolutely right. I mean, so I spoke again a little bit in my introduction about LGBT rights. As a gay man, that is important to me. It's important to a lot of people in my constituency. But absolutely, we need to make sure we have a government that is able to deliver a prosperous country. One of the things that really concerns me about this election campaign and about the discussion across the country as a whole is that there's this kind of assumption that business is somehow bad for our country, and that big business is out for itself, and we need to kind of control big business, and it's all the vested interest in big business that we need to clamp down on. Now, absolutely, we need to make sure that businesses pay their appropriate taxes, and we need to clamp down, as the government has done, on multinationals offshoring their taxes and so on. But we need to have a competitive economy that attracts investment. We need to also say to people who want to start up small businesses, we're behind you, we back entrepreneurs in our local economy. They're the small businesses that will generate jobs. They're the small businesses that will go on to be tomorrow's larger businesses. And I'm really concerned about this kind of anti-business agenda a number of our parties have. You know, we have to generate the income to spend on all these things that the Green parties and other parties want to spend. We have to generate wealth to start with. There's no such thing as government money, it's taxpayer money.
Also, particularly if it's an open economy, you know, the investment can go like that. The UK
Absolutely.
is a very open economy.
Absolutely, absolutely. We need to make sure it doesn't. We need to have an economy which encourages investment. We're seen as a safe place to invest.
Okay. Sorry, you said that you support free schools and
Yes.
parental choice.
Sorry, could I just, can I come back to you after this? I've got you down as the first person to ask, if that's okay. I'd like to give Emily a chance to respond to those 3 questions.
Thank you. I don't recognise the anti-business rhetoric we just heard. Labour, for example, is looking to have a prosperous Britain. We will bring about measures such as cutting business rates, for example. So we need an economy that is going to be fair. And on the point of identity, I think we need to recognise that many people with particular shared identities have also a shared experience of poverty. We have a clear link at the moment between poverty and disability. And that is a problem with things like the bedroom tax that the coalition have brought in. Also, whilst we've seen advances in terms of gay people's rights and place in the world, that isn't the case for many people with a transgender background. And many experience unemployment, have significant mental health problems, and have housing crises too. And they are very much in the thick of the cost of living crisis that we're facing. So that's why issues around identity and coming together with a shared agenda and seeking to influence and support each other is very, very important. Labour recognises that, and that's why we have, as well as our main manifesto, published a series of focus manifestos. And I was pleased this week to join Angela Eagle in Brighton to launch Labour's LGBT manifesto. And that addresses some of the issues from these questions. So I urge you to go and take a look at it online. It very much says that we will put on the statute book the need for sex and relationship education. I spoke earlier about how I was isolated as a child in a Catholic school, in a faith school, because I wasn't able and didn't have the confidence in order to address the issues that I was feeling. On the international aid issue, it's very important. Labour in the last Parliament had to push the coalition parties for 0.7% of GDP for international aid, and we will continue to hold that line and push for development and aid, but very much in the context of human rights and supporting the Human Rights Act and the provisions and the international instruments that many Conservatives and UKIP people want to strip away, particularly those who also want to come out of the European Union. That would be terrible for businesses and for our economy, and let alone the rights and dignity of LGBT and other people in society, such as disabled people. And that's why also, in terms of our role around the world, Labour will appoint a LGBT envoy to spread the issues of the importance and the compliance around human rights issues and international articles, and link that to our work on international development. So we have practical, pragmatic steps and clear proposals in order to go forward. And they are, as I say, in our manifesto. I think that deals with the 3 questions.
Okay, candidates, I'm going to have to start guillotining you at 1.5 minutes each so we can get around to as many questions as possible.
One of the interesting foreign policy issues recently, and we haven't heard much about foreign policy, is the fact that the Vatican are refusing to accept the French ambassador simply, it would appear, on the grounds that he's gay. Would the candidates agree with me that we should show our solidarity by withdrawing our own ambassadors from the Vatican, and thereby also save some money with a contribution to the deficit?
Yes, chat with that.
It's a question about the health service. The new Labour government introduced commercial practices into the NHS, tempering out contracts. In 2010, we had a top-down reorganisation of the health service by a coalition, something which they promised not to do in the election before. I wonder, this is the latest organisation. It's reckoned to have cost about £3 billion. Along with us with a hugely costly and bureaucratic administration. It's leading to increasing privatisation and fragmentation of the health service. Do the candidates know of any evidence, which reputable evidence, which shows that this kind of messing about with the National Health Service will actually improve things?
Thank you very much. I'll pass over to Adrian from the Liberal Democrats first.
Chris, for the folks at home, can you just give a brief thing for the questions?
Yes,
for the questions. They can't all get on the camera.
Sorry, right, my apologies.
Thank you, Chris. Right, okay. Just trying to get my head around these ones. Let's do the NHS question first. I'm going to stand up rather than sit down. Look, let's be very honest about the NHS. It's a really important British institution, and over the past 20 years, both governments of Labour and Tories and ourselves have done things which haven't exactly helped the whole situation. So, you know, when Labour say, oh, we don't like this privatisation, they forget that they actually started the whole thing in 2004 anyway. And then we've been told, and obviously with the reorganisation of the NHS since 2010, that doesn't work either. It actually requires a cross-party solution to this. Instead of it being a political football, which one side knocks one way and knocks the other way, there actually needs to be a rethought-out NHS for the whole country, and that means including all parties to actually come to a proper solution to it. Now, I'm not going to say I'm going to be able to do that if I was elected, but that's what I think is the only way forward, because I just don't see one party finding the perfect solution for it. Now, what I would say is that there has been, the Liberal Democrat manifesto has been costed to have £8 billion spent on the NHS, and that is what the Chief Executive of the NHS says they need. So if we've done that and we've costed it out, and the IFS have said, oh, you have costed it out and it actually makes sense, well, that's one step forward. But I still don't think that's the answer. I think there's still, the problems with reorganisation have meant that some ideas were put forward in 2010, some people in NHS managers actually agreed with them. Okay. But now they've actually found that they haven't worked. So we do need to have a rethink on it altogether. On the other questions, on the free schools, is a no-brainer for me. That's a simple answer. You have to have qualified teachers in school, full stop. That's what we would do. And I forgot the other question about the Vatican. Yes, actually, I think that's quite a good suggestion, and I think that would be a very good way of where we could enhance the notion that actually you can't just say someone can't do a job because of their sexuality.
James?
Okay, well, on free schools, as I said, I support free schools. I think it's actually fantastic if a group of parents or others in the local community want to establish a new school in that community. There's demand for a new school that's going to add something to the choice of education provision in that area. Then I think we should support it, and I do support that. Free schools in the name are free from local authority control. If a school therefore wants to appoint some unqualified teachers who are, I don't need to necessarily people who are sort of dragged in off the street, but presumably will have other sort of life experiences that they can bring, perhaps come from other professions and so on. Then I personally think that is something we should value, people wanting to get into the teaching profession. So I do continue to support free school. That's not the answer you wanted, but I'm being honest. On the Vatican, I'm not actually aware of the story. It's a little bit zoned out in national news in the last couple of days. It's definitely, if that is the case, let me feel that it's very concerning. Whether we should sort of immediately withdraw our ambassadors, or if there are other routes to kind of make it clear to the Vatican this is not acceptable, I think we should explore those. I don't want to particularly get drawn into the individual case, not knowing all the background. And then the third question, which was some kind of NHS. I think the important thing is that we fund our NHS properly going forward. We have a kind of plan to do that. I think the reorganisation of the NHS, it's about again, it's important I think to give kind of patients choice in terms of where they're treated, how they're treated. I think putting GPs in charge of the budgets, I think I see significant longer-term benefits for doing that. The demand on our NHS will grow significantly over the course of the next years. Drugs are getting more expensive, our population is getting more elderly. We need to have an NHS which is more efficient, is able to deliver that level of care. We need to be able to deliver the NHS, looking at that 5-year review that I think Professor Simon Stevens did. We need to make sure we're able to do that. I think the other thing I would suggest you do is compare the NHS in England with the NHS in Wales, where actually the budget was cut in Wales. We see far worse outcomes in the NHS in Wales than we do in England. So I think the NHS is safe in the Conservative Party's hands. We've pledged to find the money to fund it, and we will do that.
Thank you. And Benali.
It is very much a Green Party policy to oppose free schools and academies. My failing school was turned into an academy. The way they improved the exam results was by changing the catchment area and excluding all the kids from inner city Nottingham, and imagine it became a better school. Wonder that. And actually, very much talked about freeing schools from local authority control. But all free schools and academy do is make them directly accountable to the top of the central government. And actually, I think it's actually a more restrictive approach. And I think we should be taking back our schools. Look at Finland. It has a wonderful comprehensive model. I have no idea why we're not learning from that. Regarding the NHS, I couldn't concur more. Labour started this process. The Tories and the Lib Dems have carried it on. It's why I'm very proud Caroline Lucas has a bill in Parliament asking for the full reversal of privatisation in the NHS, not just the repeal of the Health and Social Care Act, which Labour have failed to match, but I do hope that any candidates who are elected by Labour will support Caroline Lucas's bill in Parliament. We believe that the internal market is a huge waste of money within the NHS. There is limited evidence to show that choice and competition actually drive up standards. I think the NHS works best when we cooperate, when hospitals work together, when we have a more collaborative service that is focused on delivering the service free and in the best interest of the patients. Regarding the Vatican, it's not the first time either. This is the second time the Vatican has done this. They're a serial offender, and I think that we really have to take this hugely seriously. And I do think there is remit within the EU as well to be looking at whether or not more ambassadors are coming forward for renewal or change, and whether or not we can look at our fellow partners in Europe taking a similar stance as well.
Thank you. And finally, Emily.
Labour will stop free schools. We will approve no further free schools when we come into office in a couple of weeks' time. It is a disgrace that we have 400,000 children today being taught by unqualified teachers. We should have more ambition for our children. Labour has a better plan for them. Coming on to the Vatican issue, I'm not surprised. But I think there is a role for us to play within the international community to influence within the Vatican. I think at the same time we need pressure from non-governmental organisations, and I think it's important to have a variety of strategies. I know from my years of campaigning on disability and broader equality issues like LGBT issues that you need a multitude of approaches, and therefore I think just withdrawing an ambassador, yes, it's symbolic, but I'm not sure it deals with the issues in the long term. So that would be my approach. On the NHS, I think it's appalling what this coalition has done. They brought in the Health and Social Care Act 2012. The Lib Dem that I'm standing against was that party's architect to that piece of legislation. £3 billion was spent on reorganising the NHS, and what we get for it is competition lawyers and more managers. We are committed, Labour is committed, to repeal the internal market, to sweep away that competition framework and put patients first. We will have the NHS as the preferred provider. We will also seek an exemption as part of our negotiations in the transatlantic trade and investment partnership with the Americans, between the Americans and Europe. The other main parties refuse to do that. They want private organisations, large American corporations, to take over our public services. Labour says no to that privatisation of our health service, and we will put in place an exemption. So there is much to be done, and part of that is £2.5 billion that we have costed for 8,000 more GPs where there's a primary care crisis and 20,000 more nurses, because we need more staff at the front line. And we will pay for that through a mansion tax and tax avoidance measures. All our proposals in terms of what we will deliver in the next government are fully costed and will be done through measures such as the mansion tax, taxes on tobacco firms, and also the high rate tax rate to 50p. A range of measures in terms of tax and sharing wealth, but also in terms of making things better. No more reorganisation in terms of structures, but we will bring about an integration and make savings between health and social care. So there is coordinated care and a contact point for people in crisis and people who need support both in hospital and care. So pragmatic steps.
Thank you very much, everyone. Could I just see how many more people want to ask questions? Wonderful. We've only got three. That's fourth. Could we make this the last round? I'll take 4 questions for 4 people who've just asked. Put their hands up. And then I'll ask the candidates to sum up. Yes, the chap at the back. It's happened. That's Matt. He's my brother, by the way.
Benali's already touched on the issue of faith schools and the opposition of the Green Party's placed on them. I saw throughout the same-sex marriage debate that a lot of the homophobia that was used to justify a campaign against it was often veiled with euphemisms such as religious freedom. I find it more concerning that I may be wrong about this. When I went to a faith school, it was quite different. But faith schools do still. I know faith schools do still practice selective criteria. If you're elected, what would you do, with both yourself and your party, to tackle the issues of LGBT in faith schools?
Okay, so that was, if you're elected, what will you do to tackle LGBT issues in faith schools? And I think you were talking about selective criteria in admissions as well. Okay? Hang on, was those... yourself, wasn't it? Right, have I forgotten? Okay, you go first.
Yeah, okay. I think everyone's hearing me. I'm Moroccan, by the way. So my question is, which of the parties are, what are you willing to do about the anti-science campaigns? We see the anti-vaxxers, anti-GMO and other anti-science campaigns. So would you embrace more scientific view or a campaign for it? Another thing, I think other people ask about it, like Saudi Arabia and Raif Badawi case. What our parties are willing to do about Raif Badawi and all those people who are on prisons in Egypt, in Mauritania and other countries for the sake of freedom of expression and for being just gay. Thank you.
So that's a question about freedom of expression abroad and being LGBT in countries where it's oppressed.
Lord Faulkner's bill on assisted dying. Related issues. If your party was elected, would it give it time for discussion in the Commons? And if it did, would you personally support it, attack it on the grounds that it's anti-religious, or, as my view is, want to extend it so that personal freedom and the right of people to choose their own lives and control the integrity of their own person will be respected?
So what will your party do on the right to die? Will you give it time? Will you oppose it? Will you support it? And final question. There was one more. Mary.
Can I add to that one, which is, would you go further than Lord Faulkner's bill? Because his bill is about people who are terminally ill. And I would like to think we had a right to choose to die if we're not terminally ill, if our life has become impossible.
So things like locked-in syndrome are not covered by Lord Faulkner's bill. Would you support legalisation of some sort of method for people to be able to end their lives if they so choose? Can I pass? Go to James first.
Okay. On faith schools, I mean, again, it won't surprise you given what I've said on free schools. You know, I support the rights of faith schools in our community. You know, a number of people of all different faiths. You know, as a country, we're lucky enough to have people from different faiths, and you know, and it's right that people want to have their children educated in a school reflecting their faith. It's important to them, and it's right that we should support that. I think we need to be a tolerant society, and tolerant to people who have faith, as well as to people who don't have a religious faith.
Children aren't born with faith, so
well, no. Okay, they're born into faith. They're born into faith communities. But you know, you have. I think it's right to give parents the right to choose how their children will be educated.
No, they're probably aren't they?
Hang on, if I can speak here, as I say, you know, I can understand why faith schools are not popular in this room. I can absolutely understand that. But I'm going to come here and say one thing to you guys and say something else.
Well, they're actually not popular throughout the country. I think if you look at polls.
No, they are popular. You know, I think it's important that we support the rights of parents to choose their children's education. And I think kind of, you know, aggressively kind of campaigning against a particular model of school that certain people may not support. I don't think it's necessarily tolerant either. I think on the particular point around homophobic bullying, you know, it's clear, you know, we need to clamp down on homophobic, transphobic, biphobic bullying in every type of school. That's absolutely clear. You know, the government has put more money into combating that. We need to work with organisations such as Stonewall, other third sector organisations to make sure we are effective at clamping down on that bullying. I think that goes right across all schools. On the second question of freedom of expression abroad, I mean, absolutely, it's very similar to what I was saying to the gentleman earlier on about the foreign aid budget. I think we need to use our sort of diplomatic powers and economic powers to work with governments overseas. We need to, I think, support organisations in countries you know, where LGBT rights are not where we would like them to be, so that they can kind of you know, work to get to push the change within their own countries as well, and we need to support those organisations. Then on the third question on assisted dying, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if the Conservatives have committed to giving that bill time in Parliament. One of the things we did introduce in last Parliament was actually increased powers for backbenchers to bring forward bills, and obviously that is one way to be brought forward. if I was an MP, I certainly wouldn't oppose it on religious grounds. I'm not particularly religious. I think I went to a Church of England school, but it didn't have much impact on me. I mean, I think I do have a lot of sympathy for assisted dying bills myself from a purely personal view. I think this is something that's not about party politics, it's about personal views. I think we also just need to make sure that the protections in that bill to vulnerable people are adequate. And if I could be convinced that those were adequate, then I would certainly consider supporting such a bill. And I think that would include kind of, expanding it to locked-in syndrome and so on. But again, I think it's absolutely vital that protections are in there to protect vulnerable people as well, and then we make sure, because I think often you can then get, if you like, some creep with these bills over time, and we just need to make sure, as a society, I think we're comfortable where we end up.
Okay, thank you, James. Emily?
In terms of faith schools, I think we need to get tough with faith schools in terms of any state funding arrangements and put in place clear criteria in terms of ensuring that they have inclusive schools and that they have inclusive practices, and that includes, as we have talked about earlier, sex and relationship education.
Your government expanded them.
Sorry, I didn't have that.
The Labour government expanded the number of faith schools vastly.
Right. The other thing is that my own personal experience, as I said earlier, about faith schools, in terms of personal experience, was that a Catholic education wasn't terribly successful from their point of view, because I'm a person of no religion, and therefore many of the issues we're talking about tonight, I come from a perspective of not having a religion, and that's why I would be very much, as an MP, wishing to influence within the Parliamentary Labour Party and ministers for time in relation to issues around assisted dying, for example. It is a very challenging issue, particularly for somebody like myself with a disability. I think, however, that there are strong cases for example, a living will to have a statutory basis, which they do not at the moment. And I think that's how we can help move forward the debate on assisted dying. But I am very concerned about going further, certainly at this stage, because we need to have relevant, well, not relevant, but important safeguards in place in order to ensure that disabled people are secure to continue in their lives and not feel under pressure because people are old or have a disability that they have to take that option. And that is a concern, a very serious concern amongst very severely disabled people who I work with on a day-to-day basis. That kind of legislation could lead to people like themselves to die prematurely. And we shouldn't have that pressure.
Freedom of expression.
Oh, freedom of expression, sorry. Yes, freedom of expression is vital, but with that comes responsibility. Rights and responsibilities are, in fact, two sides of the same coin. It is terrible that we have a situation where there are countries in the world still today, like Uganda, being gay will get you executed. It shows that we have moved on a lot in many countries, but it's why Labour, in opposition, have committed and have had Michael Cashman working on an international stage as our envoy on LGBT rights, and we are committed in our manifesto to appoint, for the next Labour government, to appoint an international envoy to promote human rights for LGBT people. And I think that will be a very positive message, because it gives us also an opportunity globally to bring about change, and that is going to be crucial for us all.
Thank you, Emily. Benali.
So firstly on faith schools, I think as a parent, yes, you have a right to share your beliefs and ideas with your child, but your child has a right to hear other voices and other ideas apart from your own. And regarding faith schools, I don't think they should be receiving state funding. I think it should be hugely important that other ideas and other approaches are also taught in faith schools. I'm deeply troubled around certain faith schools not teaching about evolution, scratching out the exam questions about evolution. We need to make sure that any school you go to has a multitude of voices. There's nothing wrong with sharing your culture and sharing your religion with your child, but your child needs to hear alternatives, because that is the multicultural and multifaceted society we live in. And as a state provider of education, we should be ensuring that. Regarding the Arab Spring and what we're doing to support freedom of expression and democracy across the world, I always get very annoyed when British governments start talking about British values, because it is very clear how quickly they evaporate when it comes to foreign relations. The US this week has just started giving back military aid to Egypt, despite the fact we have a brutal dictatorship that is imprisoning people who are striving for democracy, striving for a better life. And we too in Britain, we've abandoned Libya. We have left it as a failed state after carpet bombing that country. And even now, what's the worst thing is from the consequences of that, we're now not taking in the refugees that we should be. We still are refusing and demoralising LGBTI refugees, which is heinous. We're the only party calling for a moratorium in the deportation of LGBTIQ refugees until this system is fixed, because the independent reviewer of our borders, John Vine, before he left, because the coalition wasn't listening to his advice, condemned the way we are handling refugees in this country. We need to live up to our responsibilities on the international stage, and we need to start looking at an international relations and diplomacy that doesn't serve our narrow interests but works towards the betterment of humanity. On assisted dying, it is party policy to ensure that people have the right to choose to die. I do think safeguards are necessary. I do listen to disabled constituents and people who are concerned they could feel pressured into choosing that. But I do think with the proper approach, we can ensure that people who do have the choice and the really wanting to make sure they're making that decision should be supported in doing so. I think the current law is an absolute mess, with people going to dignitas, spouses and partners being persecuted. Assisted dying shouldn't be just for the wealthy who can afford to make it out to Switzerland. We really need to review these cases.
Thank you very much. And finally, Adrian. Thank you. On faith schools, Lib Dem policy isn't exactly how I'd like it to be, I have to be completely honest. But we would review the admission arrangements. They would be changed to make sure they're completely fair, and we would ensure that the same-sex relationship education was included as well. So they're the two elements that would be included, but we would still keep faith schools going as they currently are. I'm personally not happy with that, but that is party policy, so I'm being honest with you about my opinion, but I'm also being honest about the party policy as well. On LGBT rights abroad, and the situation in Libya and what's happened over this last week with the refugees in the Mediterranean, it's horrendous. We have taken a few refugees from Syria as well, but not very many and not sufficient. So we have to play a far better position on the world stage, and also with involving LGBT asylum seekers coming to here. I mean, the Lib Dems have a policy which I wrote in 2008, a long time ago, and it was not, the Labour government previously was awful at it. The coalition has improved it slightly, but it's still not good enough, and we should not be sending LGBT asylum seekers back to the country where they can be persecuted, full stop. That's my view. On assisted dying, this is a difficult issue and a very sensitive one, I think, but I know from my own party, we have party policy on this now. We went through a conference a couple of months ago. So yes, I agree with you in principle. Would I go as far as the lady? I'm a little bit nervous about that, but if there are
if it is shown to me there are sufficient safeguards and understandings around this issue, then I would be happy to go as far as you're asking for. So I think that's a fair way of summing up.
Wonderful. I realise we're all overrunning. We'll try and get this done as quickly as possible, and I would advise candidates, brevity is important because you are keeping people from the bar. So, summing up, first of all, Benali from the Green Party.
So I just really want to talk about how powerful your vote is, because so many times we're told that in our first past the post and our safe seats, what we're going to be voting for won't make a difference. But what we are building towards is a different kind of politics. May the 7th promised to deliver a result that won't look like anything we've ever had in any election before. And the fact is that the Greens and the party and the values that I'm representing have been given an unheralded amount of attention and platform this election, which has been brilliant. And the polls say over 1 million voters are going to vote Green come May. Well, what a powerful message it is to what a broken system we have if with 1 million voters we only get 1 or 2 MPs. And what's more, the power of your vote will push my fellow parties on this platform to be more progressive. You've already seen, post the Green surge, that Ed Miliband gave his first speech about the environment that he'd given in that general election campaign. I mean, the Green Party is not just about the environment, so try a little harder, Ed. But this vote that you have in May can send a powerful message to the Labour Party, to the Liberal Democrats, and the Tories that what they're offering isn't good enough. And we are building and growing in London. We have 2 London Assembly members. We will be electing more next year, I promise you. In an heralded amount of constituencies in London next year, we're going to come second, and we're going to come a strong second. And if you join this now, we can build towards electing Green MPs in London in 2020, which is going to change politics, because we are sick and tired, I know I am personally, of this rightward drift of UKIP. Let's make sure that we have more progressive MPs in Parliament. Let's elect more backups to the wonderful Caroline Lucas. Let's get 20 Caroline Lucases elected. Wouldn't that be brilliant for Parliament? And I'm so proud of the candidates that we're fielding across the UK. Get to know your Green candidate, because I'm sure they are just on the same page as me. And it's been a real pleasure, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, next we have Adrian from the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Well, it's been a really good debate, and I've really been pleased to be asked to come here tonight. Obviously, I want to say to you, yes, vote Liberal Democrat on May the 7th, but actually, the first question would be, please vote absolutely whichever party you're going to vote for, because actually, if you don't vote at all, then you aren't really giving any chance to give everyone the full view of what we all agree with and what we all support, because voting is actually the most important thing in the process. Now, I also agree that, the coalition government has been a sort of a different experiment, and we are moving to a multi-party position where we have more choice amongst who we're going to support. And I would urge you to think very carefully, especially in seats in London which are the swing marginal seats, to think about 6 particular MPs who've actually done a great job whilst in Parliament over the last 5 years, particularly Lynn Featherstone in Hornsey Green, because without her we wouldn't have Same-Sex Marriage Act, and I think that's really very important. So I think one thing we have to be really careful about is where those swing seats are. Think really carefully how you're going to vote, because what we don't want is to have a complete wave of red, blue again. I think we need to have a lot of yellow, and we might have a bit of old green thrown in there as well. Because actually, that is how our democracy is built up, because it actually represents the views of the whole country, and not just particular parts of the country. So, thank you very much for this evening. I really urge you all to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Next, James from the Conservative Party.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much for again hosting tonight and for listening to us all. I'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts. Really, what brought me into politics, and I think drives a lot of my ideals and the policies of the party that I stand for, is really a desire to place more power in the hands of individuals and families and communities as a whole. You've heard a lot tonight about legislating for various things. You know, if you listen to the other parties, often their answer to something is, well, there's a problem, let's legislate for it. I'd like to be in a world where actually we move away from thinking that legislation is the answer to everything. We need to be empowering people to take choices in their own lives about how they use public services, about how they live their lives. We need to empower people more, and that is really the driving force behind a lot of the public service, public sector reforms and ideals that you'll see in the Conservative Party. Now, what is absolutely essential for that is that we provide prosperity and security for every family, every household in this country. And again, I think a key question that you should ask of your local candidates is, does your party have a clear view on how it will deliver that prosperity? We've seen in Europe over recent years how quickly that prosperity can go. You only have to look at some of those Euro member countries. They lost control of their debts, and look at what's happened to those people in those countries over the course of the last few years. And so if we end up with a government after May the 8th, has no idea when it's going to pay off our deficit, has no real plan for getting to deliver an overall surplus to when we're paying off our deficits, then we are just going to become more ad hoc to the people who then fund that deficit. To overseas governments, to pension funds, to the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East and so on. There's nothing progressive about our country than being ad hoc to those institutions. Now also, if we lose that confidence, if institutions do not see how they're going to get their money back and when they're going to get their money back, then quite simply, interest rates will go up, the economy will suffer, unemployment will go up. And the people who will suffer the most are not the kind of pantomime villains that some of these other parties like to talk about. Bankers will probably be absolutely fine in that situation. The people who will suffer the most will be the poorest in society, the people who've got into work over the last 5 years, the people who've started an apprenticeship over the last 5 years. So we really do have to see the job through. So I just urge you, when you see your local candidates on the doorstep, ask them, do they have a plan to deliver prosperity to our country? Because not paying off our deficit, not paying off our debt, kind of sort of thinking we can sort of completely absolve ourselves from the international economy out there is no solution to our problems. It's been a difficult 5 years, but we've made a lot of progress, and we need to continue making that progress and deliver that security for every family in this country.
Thank you, James. And finally, Emily from the Labour Party.
Thank you, and thank you for this evening. Labour has 5 core pledges. Firstly, around the economy, to have a shared economic recovery that involves everybody, not the privileged few, not the trickle-down effect that the Tories want. They are seeking a further 5 years, which will bring about a reduction in public services to 35.2% of GDP. That is the lowest for 80 years before the NHS. It is sweeping away large parts of services that people need, disadvantaged people in Britain need. They are also pledging welfare cuts of £12 billion, but not saying where they come from. Labour is looking to develop and improve people's living standards. And that isn't necessarily about more benefits, it is about increasing people's wages with £8 minimum wage by tackling the cost of living crisis through regulating the energy market, freezing energy bills until 2017. Those kinds of measures that have an impact on people's daily lives. We will also, as a government, prioritise the NHS with a £2.5 billion time to care fund, which will bring in 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs. We will sweep away the internal market that has took a grip with competition lawyers in the NHS under this coalition government. Labour will also tackle immigration in a fair way. So we will bring in controls, for example, on benefits. And we will invest in young people. We will bring down tuition fees by £9,000 to £6,000 a year. We will invest in more vocational education, such as baccalaureates, and we will give votes at 16 by 2016. The Conservatives are about preserving the status quo for the rich in society. The Liberal Democrats are very much about broken promises, such as VAT and tuition fees. You'll get more. On the 8th of May, Ed Miliband or David Cameron will be Prime Minister. You have to think very carefully, very carefully. A vote elsewhere will let David Cameron into number 10 again. And do you want more of that? The reality is we do have a two-party system, even though I would like to see a thorough election system. That isn't the case at the moment. I also want to see, because of that, more LGBT people in Parliament, more women in Parliament, more equality. We can have a fairer and more diverse conversation by bringing about that equality. And my last point is, I believe, as I said at the beginning, about my core values and why I'm Labour. My story has been, my personal story has been about change, evolving, and I believe that is what Labour is offering Britain today. It is a programme of radical reform. It is about being catalyst for change, where we devolve power to communities, where we give Britain a better plan.
Thank you very much, Emily. Can I thank all of the candidates for turning up tonight and impartially wish them all well in their election campaigns. If any of you are successful, we'll be in touch.